My saw is back together. It's about just after 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon. Spent most of the day working on this saw. There's my table saw. It's a Delta contractor saw. Overall, I'm relatively happy with it. For what it is, it's a good saw. It's not a big cabinet saw, but for a contractor saw, I think it's as good as any. I think that's Delta's T-square fence, which I find to be just as good as Biesmeyer. I've used Biesmeyer plenty of times, and this one is smaller in terms of its dimensions, but I don't see any real difference in the performance. But what's been giving me a problem for, I want to say forever, but for probably the better part of 6 months, is that the blade's been out of alignment. The blade's also been filthy and caked up and needed sharpening and everything. But the biggest thing is it's been out of alignment, and I've not been able to align it. And this is a contractor saw, so the trunnions attached to the tabletop, which is probably the thing about the saw I like the least. And what I've had since the day I set the saw up here you can see the trunnion attachment, is, I want to say they're table saw pups. I should have looked this up and I didn't, I apologize. But they fit over this bolt and they come out to the side, and there's a threaded post in them here, and one over this side fits opposite. And what you do is you twist the threaded post, and it shifts this trunnion back and forth relative to this nut, which is set into the tabletop. And I used them when I was setting up the saw out of the box, and they made alignment very easy, and it aligned with virtually no issue. But over the last 6 months or so, as I said, I've had an issue not being able to bring the saw into alignment properly. And what was happening was the back of the blade was too close to the fence. The fence is perfectly parallel to the miter. I say that the back of the fence kicks out a couple thousandths as I wanted to, so I don't make any binding. But the fence is aligned to the miter slots perfectly, as far as I'm concerned. But I could not get the blade to do that. The back of the blade kept kicking in towards the fence, which was causing binding, and the back of the blade was catching things. I never had to kick back on it because I was mindful of it, but it was just causing lots of issues. So today, ripping pine. God, that's not focusing well. There we go. Ripping 1/4, or rather 1 by 3/4 inch pine, a 10-foot long piece of pine. The motor stalled 4 times, ripping that one piece of pine, and I said, all right, that's enough. I've had it, and I took the whole saw apart. I took those little adjuster things off the trunnions. I loosened the front trunnions, loosened the back trunnions, flipped it back and forth. Finally, after going back and forth over and over again, spending a couple hours on it, I got the blade to within about 3 thousandths. So I'm going to say that's close enough. And now the back of the blade is 3 thousandths away from the fence, not in towards the fence. So I should get a little less binding back there. Should be much better. I also took the blade out, and for the first time I cleaned the blade. It's not perfectly clean, it's not as good as the day new, but it's much, much better than it was. So that's basically my trials with the table saw. So now hopefully I'm going to mill up the rest of that pine. I have a whole 7 more cuts to make, and we'll see how this thing goes. But I'm hoping that by stopping work on the treehouse this morning and futzing around with the table saw, which was not on my agenda, I'm at least going to be a lot more productive in the additional work I do need to perform. So let's hope that all that work on the table saw works. Well, that seems to have done it. Here's another 10-foot 1x4 that I just ripped down, and you see the slightest bit of burning down here at the end. That's because it hit my workbench before it had cleared the back of the blade, so that was where I had to hold it while the blade slowed down. That's from. The rest of the cut looks pretty clean, just the slightest hints of burning in a couple spots. And up here near the front you'll see some burning just because I had to pause it there in the middle of the cut and reposition my hands. Nothing I can blame on the blade. And what should be a non-issue, when you're using a table saw, it's a horse and a half, it's only pine, it should be a non-issue at all. But the fact that it didn't stall is quite pleasing and quite different than my recent results on the saw. So looks like the blade alignment and cleaning was successful and hopefully worth it, and now it's back to working on the treehouse. And again we stall. Needless to say, I'm kind of losing my patience with this saw. I don't think this is a tricky cut. but the saw has an ability to do it. I'm going to give the saw another chance only because there's the much talked about one outlet. So the saw could certainly, when it begins to bind, spike a little bit over 15 amps, and that would blow the fuse, which is what's happening. I've never blown the fuse on the motor. I continually blow the fuse on the wall. So once I get it plugged into a 20 amp circuit, if she keeps stalling like this, then I'm going to have words with the saw. But for right now, it's at least improved. I'm no longer so excited, but I'm going to turn the power back on. I've turned the saw off already, so I'm going to turn the power back on, finish this cut, and just kind of put my head down and try to get work done on the treehouse.